They laughed at you, not realizing the day would come when you'd stop justifying your existence and start owning it. In the beginning, you were their joke, the misunderstood outlier they could comfortably label without ever truly knowing. You were dismissed before you even had a chance to speak your truth. They thought they had you pegged, boxed, and figured out. Conversations about you happened behind closed doors you were never invited into. They twisted your image to fit their limited understanding, and those whispers of judgment came from people who couldn't last a single day carrying the silent battles you endured daily. But here's something rarely spoken aloud. Roughly 85% of people who sling criticism are merely deflecting their own insecurities. Think about that. The majority of your critics weren't giving you feedback. They were throwing stones at a mirror, hoping that if they broke it fast enough, they wouldn't have to confront what it reflected. They didn't hate you. They hated what you represented. You were the mirror showing them everything they were too afraid to face within themselves. And when that mirror didn't crack, when your reflection stood tall, unshaken, that's when the entire energy shifted. This video isn't for the soft-spoken or easily swayed. It's for the warriors of silence, the ones who've had enough, the ones who have been laughed at, underestimated, rejected, and spoken about like they were insignificant. But instead of lashing out, they chose the path of quiet transformation. This isn't about turning the other cheek. This is about flipping the entire table. You didn't waste time arguing. You didn't react. You evolved. You didn't clap back with noise. You came back with undeniable proof. And when you did, it wasn't just your enemies who fell silent. It was everyone who realized they'd underestimated someone unstoppable. You didn't just make a comeback. You made them question their entire narrative. So get ready, because what we're about to uncover will stir your soul and hit deep. These are not sugar-coated affirmations. These are raw, divine truths forged through fire. This is your moment of sacred remembrance. The moment your silence began to echo louder than their words ever could. And don't worry, we're not going to regurgitate that old saying, silence is golden. If your silence had a price tag, it would bankrupt your enemies and still leave them in emotional debt. Quick pause, family. If this message is hitting your spirit and you feel called to support this sacred space, you can buy me a coffee. Your support helps keep this channel flowing with truth, light, and divine downloads. Link is in the description. And hey, if this word hits you deep, drop number 88 in the comments so I know you're walking this journey too. Now let's dive in. Number 1, you had a revelation. You realized that every word your critics ever spoke was never about you. It was about them. For the longest time, you took it personally. You let their words burrow into your heart, wondering what you did wrong. But then clarity came like a flash of divine lightning. Their judgments weren't about your failures, your choices, or your path. They were triggered by your presence, by the quiet power you carried and the light you didn't dim to make others comfortable. You saw through it all. You recognized that what they truly feared wasn't your mistakes, but your potential. It wasn't your flaws that disturbed them, but your authenticity. You didn't play their game. You didn't shrink to fit in. You didn't seek their approval. That made them uncomfortable. And instead of confronting their own discomfort, they projected it onto you, like it was your responsibility to soothe the parts of them they refused to heal. But here's the sacred truth. You were never the issue. You were a mirror. And mirrors don't sugarcoat. They reflect. So when they looked at you, they didn't see who you were. They saw their own limitations, their unresolved pain, their brokenness, their fears. That's why their words stung so deeply, because you hadn't yet realized those words were never really meant for you. Once you saw that, everything changed. You stopped drinking the poison of their projections. You stopped defending your worth like it was up for debate. You began to observe, not absorb. You created distance, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. And in that holy space of detachment, you reclaimed your power without raising your voice, without making a scene. Because once you understand that hate is often pain in disguise, you no longer take it personally. You don't carry it. You don't wear it. You just keep walking, free, unbothered, and finally untouchable. Number 2, You stopped chasing the applause of people who were never clapping for you in the first place. That was the true turning point. The shift. That changed everything. For so long, you kept bending yourself to fit into their broken expectations. You explained yourself over and over again, trying to be understood, trying to be accepted, hoping they'd finally see your heart and recognize your worth. You kept showing up for people who, behind the curtain, were hoping you wouldn't figure out who you truly are. You wanted their validation so badly that you didn't notice how much of yourself you were dimming just to keep them comfortable. But when you woke up, when you finally saw the game you'd been playing, you didn't just pull back, you walked away. And with that one sacred decision, the entire dynamic shifted. You saw how exhausting it was to seek approval from people who found subtle joy in minimizing your greatness. Every win you shared was downplayed. Every truth you spoke was twisted. Every time you dared to express yourself, they made you feel like you were either too much or too sensitive. But the truth is, they saw your light long before you did. They knew how powerful, how radiant, how whole you were becoming, and that scared them. Not because they didn't see your heart, but because they did. And they didn't want you to see it for yourself. So they pretended. Pretended not to notice, pretended you were average, pretended to support you, all while secretly hoping you'd stay small enough to never outshine them. But you no longer bend, you no longer explain. You no longer water yourself down to be digestible. You realize that their validation was cheap currency and your value priceless. You stopped handing your power to people who never earned the right to hold it. You stopped shrinking in spaces where you were meant to expand. You finally saw it. You're not a visitor in their world. You're building your own. And once you did, you no longer waited for their green light to move forward. That's when everything got real. Real alignment, real growth, real you. And here's the irony. The moment you stopped trying to impress them, they started watching. The same ones who ignored your voice now stalk your silence. Because nothing unnerves a critic more than someone who no longer needs their applause to breathe. Number 3, you found power in your silence, not as a form of defense, but as a declaration of strength. The silence you now carry is not the silence of fear. It is the silence of wisdom, of clarity, of peace earned through fire. There was a time when you felt compelled to respond to every lie, every misrepresentation, every whisper of doubt about your character. You clapped back. You tried to explain, tried to correct the false narratives. But eventually you realized the truth. They weren't misunderstanding you. They were committed to misrepresenting you. No amount of honesty or vulnerability would change minds that were already made up to twist your words. So you stopped trying to win them over. You stopped fighting for a seat at a table you were never meant to sit at. And instead you walked away. Not because you couldn't speak, but because you finally understood your voice was sacred, too sacred to waste on empty ears and insecure hearts. That's when you discovered a deeper freedom. You began to see that not reacting was the most powerful move you could make. You didn't retreat, you evolved. You started choosing peace over participation. You stopped explaining to those who only ever listen to argue. And in that sacred stillness, something profound happened. Your silence began to speak. They noticed. When you stopped texting back, when you stopped replying, when your name stopped showing up in rooms you once tolerated just to keep the peace, your silence became a mirror they couldn't avoid. And the more you withheld your energy, the more they felt the absence of what they once took for granted. That's the thing. People can ignore your words, but they cannot unsee your growth. You no longer fed their drama with your attention. You starved it with your stillness. And that was your boldest move yet. Silence doesn't mean you're withholding. It means you're holding strong. It means you're setting boundaries that no longer require explanation. You've stopped granting access to your spirit to those who misused it. You're no longer led by the need to be heard. You're led by purpose. And perhaps the loudest proof that you've evolved is this. You no longer argue with people you've already outgrown. Number 4, you stopped waiting for someone to hand you permission to exist fully. You quit shrinking yourself just to keep others from feeling insecure about their own limitations. There was a time when you dimmed your light, softened your voice, and questioned every bold step you wanted to take. Because somewhere along the way, you were conditioned to believe that being too much was something to be ashamed of. You hesitated before speaking, edited your brilliance, and played it safe, just hoping someone, anyone, would validate the power inside you. But all that effort, it wasn't about humility, it was self-betrayal. And finally, something inside you broke in the most liberating way possible. You had a moment of divine clarity. You realized that no one was ever going to give you the crown you were born to wear. No one was coming to write your destiny for you or give you a green light to step into your purpose. The doors you were knocking on were never meant to open for you because they were never built for someone like you. So you stopped knocking. You built your own entrance. You walked into your own becoming. You didn't demand respect with entitlement. You claimed it with alignment. It wasn't about ego. It was about truth. You were done tiptoeing around other people's comfort zones. You stopped explaining your dreams to those too afraid to dream for themselves. You no longer diluted your presence to make others comfortable. And the most incredible thing happened. The moment you made that internal shift, the world began to reflect it back. People began treating you differently, not because they suddenly understood you, but because you finally understood yourself. Your energy changed. You stopped asking for seats at tables where you were only ever tolerated and instead walked like you belonged. You were no longer seeking validation. You were embodying truth. And that truth, it radiated. Doors that once stayed locked swung open, not because someone finally invited you in, but because you showed up like the invitation had always been yours. The version of you that waited for permission wouldn't have survived this season, but the version of you now, that's the one who's unstoppable. That's the one who doesn't just walk into a room, you shift the whole atmosphere. Number 5, you began to recognize the real root of your criticism. It was never about your flaws. It was about your light. The moment you stopped seeking acceptance from those who were afraid of their own shadows, everything started making sense. The harshest voices didn't come from people stronger than you. They came from people terrified of what your strength revealed about their own complacency. Your light was a mirror, and not everyone liked what they saw when they looked into it. These weren't just critics. They were people who had chosen to remain in dim, confined corners of their lives. And your brilliance made them uncomfortable because it highlighted everything they chose not to become. At first, you took their words personally. You tried to explain yourself, tried to figure out what you did wrong. You kept wondering why they couldn't see your heart, your good intentions, your genuine spirit. But then came the breakthrough. You realized it was never about what you were doing. It was about who you were becoming. Your refusal to conform, to stay small, to live quietly inside their limitations. It threatened the stagnant version of reality they had settled for. Your growth forced them to confront their own inaction, and instead of rising with you, they tried to pull you back down. But you stopped shrinking. You stopped dimming your shine to keep others from squinting. You understood that playing small would never serve your purpose, and minimizing your greatness wasn't kindness, it was bondage. So you let go of the need to be palatable. You stopped trying to mold yourself into something more acceptable. You allowed your full radiance to be seen, even if it blinded those who refused to grow. You stopped apologizing for your power, your confidence, your glow. You stepped into your light with boldness, and in doing so, you realized that people who couldn't handle it were never meant to stand beside you anyway. Because the truth is, you weren't sent here to make everyone comfortable. You were sent here to rise. And sometimes rising means outgrowing the very people who once tried to cage your potential. You now know your light was never the problem. Their refusal to rise with you was. Number 6, you finally acknowledged your strength, even when they tried to convince you were weak. For far too long, you let their shallow definitions of strength dictate how you viewed yourself. They couldn't understand your calm under pressure, your grace in the midst of chaos, or how you kept rising again and again, without shouting, without lashing out, without becoming bitter. Because in their minds, strength had to be loud, forceful, and aggressive. If you weren't barking back, if you weren't making a scene, they assumed you were passive, fragile, weak. But you knew better. You saw through the illusion they were caught up in. You realized that real strength doesn't need to roar to be felt. It's the quiet fire that refuses to die out. Your strength was never about overpowering others. It was about remaining centered when everything around you was falling apart. It was in the way you held your ground when people tried to shake your spirit. It was in your decision to stay composed even when the world tried to pull you into chaos. You showed a level of strength that didn't need an audience. It lived in your forgiveness, in your silent endurance, in your ability to still show up for yourself even when no one else did. That kind of strength, rooted in peace, not performance, is the rarest kind. And it scared them because it made them question everything they were taught to believe about what power looks like. They tried to box you into weakness because they didn't understand your restraint. They mistook your stillness for surrender, your silence for submission, your compassion for softness. But the truth is, they were never equipped to recognize your kind of power. Your refusal to stoop to their level, your ability to remain unbothered in the face of their projections, it unsettled them because you weren't playing by their rules. You weren't reacting. You were evolving. And once you accepted that your strength didn't need to look like theirs, you stopped doubting yourself. You stopped trying to prove you were strong and began walking like it was already known. Because true strength doesn't shout, it stands. And you've been standing tall and unshakable, even when the storm was doing its best to tear you down. Number 7, you finally realized something that changed everything. Your journey was never about them. It was always about you. For so long, you allowed other people's opinions to shape your direction. You let their voices echo inside your mind, questioning your decisions, weighing down your spirit, and making you feel like you had to earn your worth through their approval. You molded yourself to fit what they wanted to see, believing that if you could just meet their expectations, you'd finally feel whole. You worked harder, pushed further, twisted yourself into smaller and smaller shapes, hoping to be enough for them. But all that striving left you empty, drained, burned out from carrying the weight of everyone else's standards. Then one day, something inside of you snapped, not in pain, but in revelation. You stepped back and saw the truth. You'd been living a life curated for others, not designed by you. And that deep exhaustion, it wasn't because you weren't good enough. It was because you were never meant to live within their limitations. You were running a race where the finish line kept moving, and it was never meant to fulfill you. That's when the shift happened. You stopped chasing their approval. You stopped bending to fit in. You stopped sacrificing your own authenticity to win their temporary applause. And you turned inward. You began asking deeper questions. What do I want? What lights me up? What does success mean to me? And in that internal dialogue, you found clarity. You found freedom. You realized that your path was never about impressing others or conforming to what society deemed acceptable. It was about alignment with your soul's truth. No one else could define your purpose. No one else could measure your value. You saw clearly that the only person whose approval ever really mattered was your own. And when you made peace with that, something incredible happened. You began living with intention. You stopped getting distracted by the noise and started moving in purpose. Your worth was no longer up for negotiation. You understood now. Your life was never meant to be lived according to their rules. You were never supposed to blend in. You were meant to rise, to stand apart, and to walk a path that only you could walk. Now you're doing just that, with confidence, with clarity, and with unapologetic power. Number 8, you stopped over-explaining your boundaries and finally let your actions do the talking. You reached a point where you were simply done. Done trying to explain your decisions to people who were never genuinely listening. Every time you drew a line for your own peace, they tried to erase it. Every time you said no for your well-being, someone acted like it was up for negotiation. And for a long time, you gave in. You explained. Out of guilt, out of fear, out of a need to seem reasonable in spaces where your boundaries were never going to be respected anyway. But eventually you woke up. You realized the hard truth, that the people who truly respected you never required an explanation in the first place. And the ones who demanded one, they weren't seeking clarity. They were seeking control. They wanted you to justify your decision so they could pick them apart and manipulate the outcome. So you stopped explaining, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. You understood that your peace didn't need a press release. It didn't need to be defended. It needed to be protected, and protection meant moving differently, not just talking about it. So you let your actions speak louder than your words ever could. You didn't announce the cutoff. You just became unavailable. You didn't scream your worth. You lived it, boldly and quietly. You no longer begged for understanding or tried to soften your truth to make others comfortable. Your absence became your answer. And that silence, it echoed in ways your long explanations never did. People noticed when you stopped picking up the phone, stopped entertaining their same draining patterns, stopped sacrificing your own peace to keep them satisfied. That was the moment your boundaries became undeniable. Not because you made a scene, but because you stopped showing up for one. You weren't being cold. You were being clear. You weren't being distant. You were finally done performing emotional labor for people who had no intention of growing. You stopped pleading to be seen, stopped defending every choice, and instead chose movement over discussion. No debates, no essays, just a shift. And that shift was louder, bolder, and more liberating than any apology or justification ever could be. You reclaimed your power the moment you realized you never needed to prove it in the first place. Number 9, you discovered the quiet power in not responding. You realized that not every comment deserved your energy. Not every insult needed a rebuttal. Not every petty jab was worth your time. There was a version of you that would have clapped back, defended your name, tried to prove the truth, but all that effort only dragged you into the very chaos you were trying to leave behind. It left you drained, stressed, mentally cluttered, tangled in battles that had no victory, only noise. And then you had a moment of clarity. You understood that real power isn't found in proving others wrong. It's found in refusing to let them pull you into the mud in the first place. You stopped giving access to your energy just because someone had an opinion. You realized that some people don't want resolution. They want reaction. They feed off the drama. They want to provoke you, lower your vibration, and watch you unravel just to feel powerful again. But you didn't play the game. You did something far more threatening to them. You did nothing. You didn't respond. You didn't clarify. You didn't try to correct the lies. You just kept building, kept healing, kept evolving. And that silence, it wasn't weakness. It was discipline, emotional maturity, self-respect. You understood that the cost of engagement was too high when the goal was to disturb your peace. So you stopped paying that price. You locked the door, took your power back, and refocused on your purpose. Let them gossip while you elevated. Let them throw shade while you glowed brighter than ever. Their noise became background static to your forward movement. You became unbothered, not because you were numb, but because you were aware. Aware that their opinions don't build your purpose. Their perceptions don't define your truth. Their words don't decide your worth. You stopped living to be understood and started living to be aligned. And that refusal to engage with nonsense, that became your loudest act of rebellion. That was the moment they realized they no longer had access to your peace. And nothing unsettles a hater more than being met with silence and success. Number 10, you stopped fighting for your power and just claimed it. You got tired of proving yourself to people who were never qualified to judge your worth in the first place. You spent too long chasing validation, explaining your value, and trying to earn a place at tables you were already overqualified for. But then it clicked. Your power was never theirs to give. You were acting like you needed permission when all along it was yours to own. You stopped performing, stopped waiting, and just stepped into your truth. No more battles, no more begging, just presence. And the moment you stopped seeking approval, everything shifted. The critics got quiet. Not because they understood you, but because you stopped needing their acceptance. You didn't win the fight. You left the ring. That's when you realized your power was never out there. It was always in you. Number 11. You began to see hate for what it really is. Proof that you matter. At first it hurt. You wondered how people who barely knew you could come at you with such negativity. But then you saw the truth. You weren't being hated because you were wrong. You were hated because you were powerful. Your growth made others uncomfortable. Your presence disrupted their comfort zones. The louder your truth became, the louder their resistance grew. But instead of shrinking, you started seeing it as confirmation. Haters don't waste energy on people who don't matter. They react to impact. Your light was exposing what they'd kept hidden, and that's why they couldn't stand you. So you stopped taking it personally and started wearing it, like a badge. The hate wasn't a sign to retreat. It was a sign you were shaking things up. You're not here to be liked. You're here to leave a mark. And clearly, you already have. Number 12, you realized you could never please everyone, and that was never your job to begin with. You spent years saying yes when you wanted to say no, toning yourself down to keep others comfortable, in chasing approval like it would finally make you feel whole. But all it brought was burnout and resentment. No matter what you did, someone always had a problem. That realization didn't break you. It freed you. You stopped trying to meet their standards and started asking yourself what you wanted. You began living for alignment, not approval. Their disappointment stopped being your responsibility, and your peace became non-negotiable. You finally chose yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. And that's when life started to feel like yours. Number 13, you stopped apologizing for being you. For too long, you made yourself smaller to fit into other people's comfort zones. You watered down your truth, second-guessed your voice, and dimmed your brilliance to be accepted. But shrinking didn't bring belonging. It brought disconnection from your own self. You realized the problem wasn't you. It was their fear of your fullness. So you stopped apologizing. You stopped explaining your fire. You stopped fitting into molds that required you to break yourself. And in that moment, you reclaimed your power. You weren't made to blend in. You were made to stand out, to disrupt, to challenge. And the ones who couldn't handle it were never meant to walk beside you. You now walk boldly, unfiltered, and unapologetic. And that alone is a revolution. Number 14, you saw the truth. Critics don't hate what they understand. They hate what they can't control. You used to exhaust yourself trying to explain your path, your choices, your vision. But they weren't confused. They were intimidated. Your depth threatened their shallowness. Your freedom exposed their fear. So they judged you, not because you were wrong, but because they couldn't box you in. And when they couldn't define you, they tried to diminish you. But you stopped explaining. You stopped shrinking. You let their confusion be their problem. You weren't sent here to be understood. You were sent to shake things up. You took your story back, not with noise, but with truth. You didn't just silence the critics. You outgrew them. You rose not in spite of the fire, but because of it. And now you shine in the spaces they swore you'd never reach. Not to prove a point, but to fulfill your purpose. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm, to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work, please consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. This helps us continually improve our content to offer you the best. The link to Buy Me a Coffee is in the description. No gift is too small. Whether it's a penny, a prayer, or a share, your generosity helps spread God's word and brings hope to others. Don't stop here. Watch our next video for powerful revelations about the signs that reveal you are the chosen one. We've enjoyed following this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Keep shining brightly and embrace your destiny with courage. See you next time. Blessings to all the beautiful souls from the Wisdom Dynamic.